Emily Parker had always been different, though no one in her small town could pinpoint exactly why. To the casual observer, she was the typical teenager, attending school, helping her mother with errands, jogging through the quiet streets in the mornings, and occasionally hanging out with classmates at the local diner. She smiled politely, engaged in conversations just enough to seem normal, and followed the routines everyone expected. Yet behind her calm eyes lay something the world had never seen: an intensity, a focus, and a discipline that refused to be ignored. Her home was modest, a two-story house at the end of Maple Street, with a small yard where autumn leaves clung stubbornly to the grass. Inside, her room told a story of contrasts. Posters of landscapes and cityscapes covered the walls, a testament to a longing for the outside world, while meticulously arranged notebooks, diagrams, and maps revealed a mind that calculated, planned, and observed. Every night, while her mother slept, Emily would slip quietly into the backyard, pulling a worn rifle case from under her bed. The weight of it in her hands felt familiar, almost comforting. Each night, she would practice precision drills, breath control, and imaginary targets, without ever allowing a sound to betray her. Her neighbors had long whispered about Emily's peculiar habits. She rarely attended parties, avoided loud social gatherings, and often disappeared for hours in the nearby woods. Some claimed she was shy, others thought she was simply eccentric. No one suspected the truth. She was training, honing a skill that had once been the secret of a legendary soldier, preparing for a life that remained hidden from the world. Emily's dedication was absolute. Every missed opportunity to socialize, every quiet evening spent alone, was an investment in something far greater than herself, a path few could imagine, let alone follow. The origin of her extraordinary discipline lay in a secret mentor, a retired military sniper named Samuel Kane. Kane had once been a ghost in conflicts overseas, a figure whose reputation preceded him in whispers among soldiers and intelligence officers. His precision was legendary, his calm under fire unmatched, and his ability to make impossible shots had saved countless lives. After decades in the shadows, haunted by memories he could not erase, he had retreated from public life, living in isolation in the outskirts of the state. Yet even in seclusion, he had not abandoned his mission. He sought a successor, someone with the intellect, patience, and morality to inherit not just his skills, but the burden of his legacy. He found that person in Emily. It had begun innocuously, with a chance meeting in the local library. Kane noticed her attention to detail, the way she observed patterns, the quiet intensity with which she absorbed information. Over weeks, he began to test her subtly, leaving books and articles on tactics, strategy, and history within her reach. Emily devoured them, asking questions that revealed an analytical mind capable of understanding complexity far beyond her years. When Kane finally approached her, offering training in secrecy, she did not hesitate. She had always felt a pull towards something extraordinary, a path that demanded discipline, courage, and an unwavering focus that few could comprehend. Training began cautiously. Kane was meticulous, insisting on precision in everything from the way Emily held her rifle to the way she observed her surroundings. He taught her that the key to mastery was not raw strength or reflex, but patience, awareness, and control. Emily learned to move silently through the woods, to notice subtle changes in the wind, the angle of sunlight, and the distant rustle of leaves that might betray an unseen presence. She studied shadows and reflections, memorized topography, and cataloged patterns in human behavior. Every day presented a new challenge, a new skill to master, and every night left her exhausted but driven. It was not just physical training that Kane imparted. He focused equally on mental resilience. Emily learned to control fear, to remain calm under stress, and to make decisions when hesitation could cost lives. Kane told stories of missions he had undertaken, of choices made in seconds that had ripple effects far beyond comprehension. He shared the weight of responsibility, impressing upon her that the greatest power of a sniper was not in the rifle, but in the mind behind it. Emily absorbed every word, understanding that skill alone was not enough. The morality behind action was equally crucial. Weeks turned into months, and Emily's transformation became apparent. Her posture changed, becoming both alert and relaxed, her eyes sharper, her reflexes faster. Even in ordinary moments walking to school, waiting in line at the grocery store, she noticed details others overlooked, the way someone shifted their weight, a fleeting expression of anxiety, the trajectory of a bird taking flight. These small observations, Kane explained, were the foundation of her growing ability to anticipate events before they unfolded. Emily's world had expanded. The ordinary life of her town now hid layers of meaning, patterns, and connections invisible to everyone else. Yet for all her progress, secrecy remained paramount. Kane insisted that no one could know, not her friends, not her family, and certainly not the authorities. The danger was not only physical, but moral. Exposure could compromise her effectiveness and place others at risk. Emily adapted, cultivating a double life: visible as a quiet, intelligent teenager, invisible as a meticulous observer and trainee. Her discipline extended to mundane routines. She memorized schedules, avoided predictable paths, and ensured no trace of her training escaped her home. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. The quiet streets of her town became both her playground and her training ground, a place where mastery met discretion. The first glimmers of purpose began to crystallize when Kane explained the true scope of her potential role. He spoke of threats unseen by the public eye, dangers lurking in shadows, and the rare individuals capable of intervention without detection. Emily understood, perhaps instinctively, that her training was not just preparation, it was a calling. Every night spent in the cold, every missed social moment, every challenge met in isolation was part of a mission she had not yet fully seen, but already felt in her bones. She had been chosen for something monumental, something that would test every lesson Kane had instilled. As part one closes, Emily stands in the darkness of the woods behind her house, rifle in hand, the night air crisp against her face. She inhales deeply, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, and exhales slowly, steadying her mind. In the distance, the faint glow of town lights stretches across the horizon, oblivious to the quiet transformation taking place on the outskirts. Emily is no longer just a girl. She is a student of shadows, a custodian of precision, and a future force whose destiny has been shaped in secrecy. Kane watches from afar, satisfied that his years of experience have found a worthy successor, yet wary of the challenges that lie ahead. The story has only begun, but already, the ordinary life Emily once knew is gone, replaced by the extraordinary path she has chosen, and one that the world will one day need her to walk. Samuel Kane had once been a name whispered in military circles, with a mixture of awe and fear. He was a man who had walked the line between life and death countless times, whose calm demeanor under fire had saved lives that no one could count. Decorated, respected, and yet profoundly haunted, Kane had vanished from public view years ago, leaving behind a legacy that seemed almost mythic. Few knew where he had gone, and fewer still could have guessed the truth. He was watching, training, waiting. When Kane first approached Emily Parker, he did not do so lightly. He had seen many candidates, many young minds that seemed promising on paper but crumbled under scrutiny. But Emily was different. Her calm, deliberate manner, her innate curiosity, and her ability to observe without judgment reminded him of himself when he was young, a raw talent, tempered by intellect and morality. He watched her for weeks, analyzing her reactions to information, her attention to detail, and the steadiness in her gaze. One afternoon, as she studied a historical account of battles in the library, Cain decided it was time. He approached her quietly, not with the bluster of a soldier, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived things most could not imagine. "You have potential," he said simply, placing a worn, leather-bound notebook on the table. Emily looked up, startled, but not frightened. She had a natural intuition that this encounter was no accident. Cain's eyes, sharp and knowing, seemed to see through her as if he could measure her very soul. "I can teach you skills that few will ever know," he continued, "but you must understand, this path is not for the faint of heart. You will face challenges the world cannot comprehend." Emily did not hesitate. She had sensed for years that her life was meant for something extraordinary, though she had never known what. Her mind raced with questions, yet she felt a strange certainty that Cain was the key. Over the next several weeks, he introduced her to the principles of stealth, precision, and observation, not as exercises, but as a philosophy. Cain explained that the essence of being a sniper was not simply hitting a target, but understanding the world in layers, noticing the smallest movement, predicting human behavior, and above all, understanding responsibility. The training was rigorous, far beyond anything Emily had imagined. Cain took her to secluded forests, abandoned warehouses, and rugged terrains, teaching her to move silently, to blend into her environment, and to anticipate danger without relying on weapons. Emily learned to listen, not just to sounds, but to the rhythm of life around her. A snapping twig, a rustling leaf, a subtle shift of shadows, all became cues that guided her actions. Cain emphasized that the rifle was merely a tool. The real power lay in the mind behind it. Emily's first lessons focused on observation. Cain would place objects in a field or a room and have her detect anomalies, subtle changes that a casual eye would overlook. She tracked movements of birds, animals, and eventually humans, cataloging patterns that would allow her to anticipate behavior. "Patience," Cain said one evening as they crouched in the woods, shadows stretching across their faces, "is everything. One wrong move, one impatient action, and the mission is lost." Precision is as much about waiting as it is about acting. Emily absorbed every word, her focus absolute. As weeks passed, Cain introduced her to firearms. At first, the lessons were basic safety, stance, breath control, but quickly advanced to complex scenarios. He taught her to account for wind, elevation, and even atmospheric pressure. Emily practiced for hours, learning to remain calm while the rifle felt like an extension of her body. Cain watched, occasionally offering corrections, but mostly allowing her to discover her own rhythm. Her progress amazed him. She had a rare combination of patience, intuition, and discipline that few could match, even among seasoned professionals. But Cain's training went beyond the technical. He shared stories from his past missions, some classified, some personal. He spoke of moments when seconds had decided the fate of entire operations, of choices that weighed heavily on conscience long after the mission was over. He impressed upon Emily the ethical dimension of power, the importance of restraint, judgment, and knowing when not to act. Emily listened, realizing that skill alone could be dangerous without a moral compass. She learned that a true sniper was not measured by the shots they took, but by the lives they chose to protect. Emily's transformation was not only physical and mental, but also emotional. Cain taught her to manage fear, to convert it into focus, and to remain calm under pressure. He simulated scenarios of extreme stress hostages, ambushes, and high-stakes reconnaissance missions. Emily adapted, her instincts sharpening with every exercise. She learned to mask emotion, to make decisions in silence, and to move through the world unnoticed. The quiet teenager her neighbors saw was a carefully maintained facade. Beneath it, she was evolving into a force capable of operating at the highest levels of skill and discretion. Yet the relationship between Cain and Emily was more than mentor and student. Over time, it developed into a deep bond, akin to that of a father and daughter, built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Cain saw in her not just a successor, but a reflection of hope that someone could carry forward his knowledge and values without the scars that had marked his own life. Emily, in turn, admired Cain's wisdom and experience, learning not only how to survive and excel, but how to navigate the moral complexities of wielding power responsibly. As Emily grew in skill and confidence, Cain began to reveal glimpses of the larger world she was being prepared for. He spoke of threats the public never saw, situations where ordinary systems failed, and the rare individuals capable of intervening without recognition. He explained that their work would remain hidden, that their victories might never be celebrated, and that the stakes were far higher than Emily could yet imagine. Each revelation fueled her determination. She understood that her training was not a hobby or an experiment, but a preparation for a future where her abilities could shape events in ways no one else could. By the end of Part 2, Emily had evolved from a curious, disciplined teenager into a protege ready for real-world application. Cain had molded her body, mind, and spirit into a weapon of precision tempered with conscience. In the silent nights of their secluded training grounds, she practiced, observed, and planned, fully aware that the world beyond her small town remained unaware of her existence, and that one day, the skills she had honed in secrecy would be called upon to face dangers the ordinary citizen could never imagine. Cain, ever vigilant, knew that this day would come, and when it did, Emily would be ready. In the quiet moments, as moonlight filtered through the trees, Cain would watch her from a distance, noting the subtle grace of her movements, the focus in her eyes, and the confidence growing in her posture. He allowed himself a rare feeling of pride, tempered by caution. He had trained many, but Emily was exceptional. Her journey was only beginning, and the challenges ahead would test everything she had learned. Yet Cain knew one truth: the world had gained a guardian it would never see, and Emily Parker was ready to rise to the occasion. The days grew longer, and Emily's training intensified. She and Cain moved from the quiet forests near her home to abandoned industrial sites, rugged hillsides, and secluded cabins miles from any human presence. Each location was carefully chosen to test a different aspect of her developing skill set. Emily learned that mastery was not simply hitting a target. It was understanding the environment, predicting movement, and becoming one with the landscape. Cain taught her to read subtle changes in wind, to feel the shift in temperature, and to anticipate sounds that no ordinary person would notice. Every rustle, every shadow, every flicker of light became part of her awareness. Cain's lessons extended beyond the physical. A sniper does not just shoot, he reminded her one afternoon as they crouched behind a ridge overlooking a valley. He watches. He waits. He becomes invisible while remaining aware of everything. Emily learned to move silently through forests, to use terrain to conceal herself, and to blend with her surroundings as if she were a ghost. At first, it felt unnatural. The instinct to rush, to act quickly, to react impulsively, was strong. Cain was patient, allowing her to discover her rhythm through trial and error, correcting her posture, her breathing, and her thought process with meticulous care. Breath control became a central part of her practice. Cain taught her that a single shot required harmony between mind, body, and environment. Emily spent hours focusing on her heartbeat, her inhalation, and the subtle movement of her chest. She practiced holding her breath for increasingly long periods, learning to steady her rifle while the world around her moved in chaos. Cain reminded her constantly that the rifle was only a tool. The real weapon was her mind. The moment you act without thinking, you lose control, he said. The moment you hesitate when it matters, someone else pays. Observation exercises consumed entire days. Kane would arrange objects in the woods or an empty building, subtly moving items or placing anomalies, and Emily would be tasked with detecting them. Then came tracking exercises. She learned to follow footprints, detect broken branches, and interpret subtle signs of human movement. She cataloged patterns in the way people walked, the timing of traffic, the rhythm of daily routines. Everything was data, and she processed it instinctively. Slowly, Emily began to understand that being a sniper meant becoming a part of the environment unseen, yet fully aware of every detail that might matter. Emily's nights were equally intense. Kane introduced her to scenarios of extreme stress. She had to remain undetected while approaching targets, making decisions under simulated danger, and maintaining focus even as distractions were thrown in her path. One night, he released trained dogs into a nearby field while she had to navigate it silently. At first, she froze in fear, the instinct to flee nearly overwhelming her. Kane's calm voice cut through the night. Control the fear. Don't let it control you. Emily exhaled slowly, adjusted her stance, and moved forward. Each test honed her nerves and mental resilience, preparing her for situations that would demand total composure. Mental exercises became a daily regimen. Kane provided her with scenarios, asking her to anticipate the next steps of potential targets, to plan escape routes, and to make decisions that could affect dozens of lives. Emily realized that her mind had to work faster than the world around her. She began visualizing situations before they occurred, mentally running simulations, predicting outcomes, and testing her reactions. This was as exhausting as physical training, yet deeply satisfying. Every night she returned home physically tired but mentally sharper, feeling her capacity for strategy and foresight expand. Yet Kane's most critical lessons were about restraint. Skill without judgment is danger, he told her during one long evening in the cabin. He described operations in which soldiers had failed because they acted impulsively, causing unintended consequences. Emily learned that a sniper must be patient to the point of discomfort, waiting for the precise moment to act. Sometimes that meant hours, sometimes days, even weeks. The right action at the right time could save lives, while a wrong one could destroy them. Emily absorbed these lessons as if etched into her very being, understanding that true mastery required not only skill, but a moral compass. Her bond with Kane deepened during these months of grueling training. He became both teacher and protector, a figure of guidance who challenged her relentlessly while nurturing her growth. Emily admired his wisdom. In the stories he shared vivid accounts of missions in distant lands, moments of triumph, and scars left by choices made under pressure. Yet Kane also imparted caution. She must never underestimate her adversaries, never let overconfidence cloud judgment, and never reveal her abilities to those unprepared to understand them. These lessons became part of her identity, shaping not only how she moved and observed, but how she thought and felt. Physical conditioning remained rigorous. Emily ran miles before dawn, climbed hills with weighted packs, and practiced endurance exercises that pushed her to the limits of stamina. Her muscles grew lean and strong, her reflexes precise. Kane emphasized that physical fitness was inseparable from mental acuity. A sniper must endure fatigue without faltering, maintain focus despite exhaustion, and make flawless decisions when every second counts. Emily accepted the strain with resolve, her mind embracing the challenge as an essential part of her transformation. One night, as snow fell softly over the hills, Kane took Emily to a ridge overlooking the town. The lights below twinkled innocently, unaware of the forces shaping the girl crouched in the shadows above. Kane gestured toward the streets and said, "The world is full of people who cannot see what's coming. Our job is not to be seen, but to protect, to act when necessary, and to remain unseen when we must." Every detail matters. Every decision matters. Do you understand? Emily nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She understood. By the end of these months, Emily had changed in ways the town could never perceive. To the world, she was still the quiet, intelligent teenager, polite and unassuming. But beneath that exterior, she had become something far more formidable, patient, precise, and aware. She could anticipate movement, calculate trajectories, blend seamlessly into her environment, and remain calm under pressure. Kane observed her silently, noting the subtle confidence in her movements, the precision in her gaze, and the instinctive grace she had developed. She was ready for more than practice exercises. She was ready to confront the challenges that lay beyond the training grounds. Yet Kane knew this phase was only the beginning. Lessons in silence, observation, and restraint were foundations. But the real tests would come in the unpredictable world beyond their controlled exercises. Emily would face moral dilemmas, split-second decisions, and threats that could not be simulated. Kane watched her with pride and caution, understanding that while she had mastered the basics, the ultimate measure of a sniper was not skill alone, it was courage, judgment, and the ability to remain human amidst chaos. As Part 3 closes, Emily lay awake in her cabin bed, listening to the wind through the trees. Her body ached from the day's exertions, yet her mind was alive, cataloging every movement, every sound, every shadow she had encountered. She knew her training was far from complete, but she felt an exhilaration she had never experienced before. Kane's voice echoed in her memory. Precision is patience. Observation is power. Restraint is responsibility. She understood the truth of those words, feeling them resonate through her being. In the quiet of the night, Emily Parker, once an ordinary teenager, was becoming someone extraordinary, a figure shaped by skill, secrecy, and purpose, destined to face a world that remained blissfully unaware of the force lurking in its shadows. The first true test of Emily's training came sooner than she expected. Kane had prepared her for controlled exercises, simulated scenarios, and extreme endurance challenges. But nothing could replicate the unpredictability of the real world. One late afternoon, he approached her as she practiced breathing drills in the snow-dusted clearing behind their cabin. "It's time," he said quietly, eyes scanning the horizon as though searching for unseen watchers. Emily's heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from anticipation. She had trained for this moment, yet the reality of it made her pulse quicken. Kane briefed her carefully. A young child had wandered into a dangerous urban area, the outskirts of town near abandoned buildings known for illicit activities. Law enforcement had limited intelligence and resources, and time was critical. Kane's instructions were precise. Observe, gather information, remain unseen, and only intervene if absolutely necessary. Emily nodded, understanding that this mission was more than a test. It was her first opportunity to apply everything she had learned in a real-life scenario. She felt a surge of responsibility. Lives depended on her composure, awareness, and judgment. Emily moved silently, her boots making no more than a whisper on cracked pavement. Every sense was alert. She noted the positions of nearby people, the patterns of vehicles passing by, and the subtle sounds of the urban environment. A cat darting across an alley, a faint hum of machinery, the rustle of papers caught in the wind. Kane had trained her to detect anomalies, and tonight, the city itself became a test. She understood that failure was not an option. Her training was only as effective as her ability to execute it under pressure. Hours passed as Emily shadowed the area from hidden vantage points. She observed a group of men moving suspiciously near a warehouse, unaware of her presence atop a fire escape across the street. Every movement was catalogued mentally. Gait, gestures, proximity to each other, potential threats to the child. Emily's mind worked tirelessly, predicting possible outcomes and planning contingencies. Kane's words echoed in her memory. The right action is not always the immediate one. Sometimes, patience saves more lives than action. She breathed slowly, heart steady, waiting for the precise moment to intervene. The child's location became apparent through subtle clues. A small shoe print near a fence, a faint cry carried by the wind, and an object that had fallen from the child's hand. Emily traced the movements carefully, adjusting her position with each step. She remained entirely unseen, blending into shadows, moving silently across rooftops, and observing from cover. Her training had prepared her for this, but the reality of it, the stakes, the responsibility, made every decision weighty. Every step required precision. Every observation demanded focus. Eventually, the child was spotted by one of the men, who approached with a menacing gait. Emily assessed the situation quickly. Intervention was necessary, but it had to be discreet to avoid alerting the others. Drawing on months of tactical training, she identified the optimal vantage point, calculated angles and distances, and prepared to act. Her mind was calm, her body steady, her breathing controlled. This was no longer practice. It was a real test of skill, judgment, and moral responsibility. Emily acted with perfect timing. She used a combination of distraction and subtle signaling to guide the child to safety without the men realizing it. A dropped object, a shifted shadow, a silent cue, all orchestrated with precision. The child followed instinctively, trusting the unseen protector. The men, unaware of the intervention, continued their movement, oblivious to the child slipping out of danger. Kane watched silently from a distance, his pride tempered by vigilance. Emily had executed the mission flawlessly, demonstrating the culmination of patience, observation, and skill he had drilled into her. Once the child was safe, Emily retreated to her observation point, heart still racing with adrenaline. Kane approached quietly, a rare smile crossing his face. "You did well," he said, his voice calm but proud. "Not because you completed the mission, but because you understood the principle. The objective is not the action itself, but the lives you protect. You waited, you observed, and you acted at the perfect moment. That is the difference between skill and mastery." Emily felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a profound understanding of responsibility. This was only the beginning. The experience left a lasting impact. Emily realized that her abilities were not for recognition or glory, but for protection. She felt the weight of her mentor's teachings, the importance of restraint, observation, and ethical decision-making. Kane emphasized that real-world applications of their training were unpredictable. No simulation could fully replicate the stakes, the pressure, or the consequences of error. Emily absorbed these lessons deeply, understanding that the first test had not only evaluated her skill, but also strengthened her resolve, judgment, and sense of purpose. In the following days, Kane guided her through debriefing. They analyzed every movement, decision, and observation, discussing what went well and what could be improved. Emily learned the value of reflection and continuous learning, recognizing that mastery required constant evaluation and adjustment. Kane reminded her that every mission, no matter how small, carried lessons that would prepare her for greater challenges. Emily felt her confidence grow, not arrogance, but a grounded assurance in her abilities and judgment. By the end of the first test, Emily had transformed from a student of theory and practice into an operative capable of real-world action. Her mental acuity, physical precision, and ethical awareness had been tested under live conditions, and she had succeeded. Kane knew that she had passed a critical milestone. She could now operate independently, make split-second decisions, and remain calm under pressure, qualities essential for the missions that would define her path. Yet Kane also reminded her of the limits. "Every mission carries unpredictability," he said. You may succeed today, but tomorrow may present challenges no training can fully prepare you for. Trust your instincts, rely on your preparation, and never lose sight of your responsibility. Skill without judgment is dangerous. Judgment without skill is powerless. You now have both, but you must continue to grow. Emily nodded, understanding that the journey was far from over. She had taken the first step into a world where precision, patience, and moral courage were paramount. As night fell over the town, Emily returned home, her body tired, but her mind alert. She felt a new sense of purpose, a realization that her training had tangible impact. The town remained oblivious to the invisible guardian who had just ensured the safety of one of its youngest residents. Cain watched from the shadows, proud yet ever vigilant. Emily had passed her first test, but the true challenges were only beginning. The foundation had been laid, the lessons absorbed, and the responsibility fully understood. She was no longer just a trainee, she was a force, prepared to act when the world demanded it. The months after her first test passed quietly in her small town, but Emily's world was no longer confined to familiar streets or secluded woods. She had become a shadow, alert and observant, moving unseen, even in plain sight. Cain had warned her that her training was preparation for something far larger than local rescues or isolated exercises. The world, he said one evening as snow melted into early spring, is full of dangers that most people will never see. Our job is not to be recognized. Our job is to protect silently and precisely when others cannot. Emily absorbed the weight of his words, feeling the scope of her responsibility expand beyond anything she had imagined. It began with small signs, cryptic news reports, unexplained disappearances, and hints of criminal networks operating in cities and towns across the country. Cain monitored the situation closely, analyzing patterns that suggested coordinated efforts far more dangerous than ordinary crime. Emily, with her growing skills, became his eyes and ears in the field. She observed unusual movements, noted irregular behaviors, and recorded anomalies that others overlooked. Even in her quiet town, she noticed subtle indications of wider threats. Cars parked for hours in unusual locations, strangers moving with purpose, coded conversations carried out in public without detection. Emily's training now extended to intelligence gathering. Cain introduced her to encrypted communication, mapping of critical infrastructure, and pattern recognition on a national scale. Every day, she studied reports, monitored online activity, and correlated incidents to uncover hidden networks. Her mind worked tirelessly, cataloging potential threats and predicting their next moves. She learned to identify priorities, weigh risks, and make decisions that balanced caution with action. Cain emphasized the moral dimension. The goal was always protection, never aggression. Emily internalized these principles, understanding that her role as a silent guardian was both powerful and ethically complex. The first tangible threat emerged when a mysterious organization began targeting public facilities and infrastructure in multiple states. Their actions were subtle but effective, creating panic without drawing attention to their orchestrators. Emily and Cain observed from afar, mapping movements, anticipating vulnerabilities, and preparing for intervention. Cain stressed the importance of patience. Rushing in, he warned, without complete knowledge, risks everything. Sometimes you must watch, wait, and strike only when the timing is perfect. Emily's training had prepared her for this, but the stakes were higher than anything she had encountered. The consequences were no longer local, they were national. Emily's role became increasingly active. Using her skills, she tracked suspicious individuals, intercepted critical information, and documented potential threats while remaining invisible to the world. Her observations were precise. She noted license plates, facial expressions, and routines. She predicted meetings and movements, passing intelligence to Cain for further analysis. Each action required patience, focus, and self-restraint. Kane reminded her constantly that success was measured not by action alone, but by precision and outcome. Emily felt the tension rise as she realized that any misstep could cost countless lives. Her nights were filled with vigilance. Emily moved through urban landscapes, crouching in shadows, scanning rooftops, and slipping through alleys unnoticed. Every detail mattered: the angle of a streetlight, the sound of footsteps, the direction of traffic flow. She had become a ghost, present yet unseen, her senses tuned to detect anomalies invisible to ordinary eyes. Kane observed her from a distance, evaluating her performance, offering subtle guidance, and allowing her to make independent decisions. The stakes were immense, yet Emily moved with confidence, relying on the months of rigorous training that had forged her body, mind, and judgment. Tensions escalated when the organization escalated its attacks. Public officials were threatened, and critical facilities were sabotaged. Law enforcement struggled to respond effectively, unaware of the network operating in the shadows. Kane knew Emily's abilities were needed, but intervention required careful planning. She could not act impulsively. Every move had to be calculated to protect lives while maintaining secrecy. Emily spent long hours analyzing patterns, anticipating threats, and preparing contingency plans. She realized that her training was no longer theoretical. It was being applied in real time to protect the nation. Emily's first major coordinated observation mission involved a critical site targeted by the organization. She positioned herself on a nearby rooftop, blending seamlessly with her environment. Her eyes scanned the area, tracking individuals, vehicles, and patterns. She anticipated movements, calculated distances, and prepared for rapid decisions. Kane communicated through subtle signals, guiding her without revealing her presence. The night was tense, every second stretching into eternity. Emily's heart remained steady, her mind focused, her body poised to act only when necessary. Patience became her greatest weapon. As the night unfolded, Emily observed suspicious activity that suggested an imminent attack on the facility. She documented every detail, predicting the timing and sequence of events. At Kane's subtle guidance, she acted to divert attention without detection. Small distractions, silent signals, and strategic positioning ensured that the threat did not reach its objective. Civilians and officials remained unaware, their safety maintained by Emily's precision and restraint. Kane watched silently, his pride tempered by vigilance. Emily had executed a complex operation flawlessly, demonstrating her ability to navigate high-stakes, real-world scenarios with ethical judgment and tactical skill. The success of the mission confirmed Emily's readiness for the larger challenges ahead. Kane reminded her that their work would remain hidden from the public, but the impact was profound. The organization had been delayed, intelligence had been gathered, and lives had been protected. Emily felt a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer merely a trainee. She was an operative, capable of independent decision-making, precise action, and ethical judgment. The responsibility weighed heavily, but it was also exhilarating, a confirmation that her months of rigorous training had prepared her for this critical role. By the end of the operation, Emily had embraced the reality of her mission. She was part of a network unseen by the public, a silent guardian ensuring the safety of countless people. Kane emphasized that vigilance must continue indefinitely. Threats were unpredictable, and the world remained unaware of the forces protecting it. Emily understood that this was only the beginning. Her training had prepared her for stealth, observation, and restraint, but the future would demand courage, judgment, and precise action in situations where lives hung in the balance. As dawn broke over the city, Emily reflected on the night's events. She had moved unseen, acted decisively, and protected lives without recognition. The weight of her responsibility settled on her shoulders, but she accepted it fully. Kane's voice echoed in her memory. You are the invisible hand, the unseen protector. Your strength is not just skill, but patience, judgment, and restraint. Never forget that, Emily understood. The nation remained oblivious to the shadows where she operated, yet her impact was undeniable. She had become a force capable of confronting threats the ordinary world could never comprehend. The experience left Emily more confident, more aware, and more resolute. She had seen firsthand the scope of danger, the importance of preparation, and the necessity of restraint. Kane's teachings had evolved from exercises to real-world application, and Emily had risen to the occasion. The nation was entering a period of shadows, where unseen threats could strike at any moment. Emily was no longer a student. She was a guardian, poised to act with precision and conscience. She understood that the world was watching, even if it did not know it, and that her journey was only beginning. The tension in the city was palpable. Emergency alerts had flashed across screens. News outlets scrambled to report on an imminent threat, and the public moved in confusion, unaware of the danger that loomed. Emily crouched atop a building several blocks from the epicenter, her rifle resting lightly against her shoulder, her eye trained on the scope. The months of grueling training, the countless drills, and the exercises in silence had led to this moment. She could feel her heart steady, her breathing measured, and her mind entirely focused. The world below was a labyrinth of threats, each decision potentially life or death. Kane observed from a nearby rooftop, communicating only through subtle signals, a calm presence in the chaos. He had guided her to this vantage point, calculated the angle of approach, and analyzed the likely sequence of events. "Remember," he whispered quietly through a concealed earpiece, "precision is patience. One shot, one moment, one choice. Nothing more." Emily nodded imperceptibly, her fingers steady on the trigger, her eyes scanning for the critical movement that would indicate the optimal moment. Every detail mattered: the shift of a shadow, the twitch of a hand, the glimmer of movement in the distance. The target appeared, moving purposefully through a crowded plaza. Emily identified the individual immediately, a figure responsible for orchestrating a series of attacks across the region. Civilians swirled unknowingly around him, oblivious to the danger. Emily's mind raced through calculations: distance, wind, trajectory, elevation. But Kane's voice reminded her again to focus, to wait, to ensure precision. Time seemed to stretch. One miscalculation could endanger countless lives. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. Yet her focus remained unbroken. Emily's training allowed her to anticipate the target's path. She adjusted for environmental variables: a slight breeze from the north, the reflection of sunlight off nearby glass, and the movement of people in the plaza. She positioned herself with perfect alignment, blending seamlessly into the rooftop's shadows. Her pulse slowed to a steady rhythm. Each heartbeat was deliberate, each breath measured. The months of instruction in patience and control crystallized in this moment. She understood fully that her role was not to act recklessly, but to wait for the exact instant when the shot would be decisive, precise, and ethical. As the target paused near a cluster of pedestrians, Emily made the final calculations. Kane's presence in her ear was steady, guiding subtly. Focus. Aim. Breathe. Now is the moment. Her finger tightened on the trigger, the rifle an extension of her body, her mind synchronized with the environment. The target's movements aligned with her calculations. The perfect window of opportunity had arrived. Emily held the shot, observing for one last confirmation. She saw an innocent child step slightly out of the danger zone, confirming that civilian safety was uncompromised. Then, with calm precision, she squeezed the trigger. The shot was silent to all but the trained ear. The bullet traveled with flawless accuracy, neutralizing the target instantly without harm to surrounding civilians. The plaza froze in stunned disbelief as the threat collapsed. No one knew who had acted or how, only that the immediate danger had vanished as if by miracle. Emily exhaled, her body relaxing slightly, though her mind remained alert, scanning for any secondary threats. Kane allowed himself a brief smile, recognizing the perfection of her execution. She had carried out everything she had trained for: flawless, ethical, decisive. The aftermath was chaotic, yet controlled. Law enforcement arrived moments later, unaware of the invisible operative who had averted disaster. News cameras flashed, reporting the mysterious incident, attributing it to unknown heroes or divine intervention. Emily remained on the rooftop, unseen and unacknowledged, but fully aware of the impact of her action. She understood the gravity of her responsibility, the lives saved, the chaos prevented, and the legacy of restraint and precision she embodied. Kane silently congratulated her, emphasizing that recognition was not the goal. Protection, effectiveness, and morality were. Emily retreated from the rooftop, her movements silent and deliberate. She navigated alleys, scaled minor obstacles, and vanished into the city streets without detection. Her training had prepared her not only for the shot itself, but for extraction, concealment, and continuous observation. She understood the necessity of remaining invisible in a world that would never acknowledge her deeds. Kane's voice reminded her, "You are the unseen guardian. Your work is not to be celebrated, but to be effective. Remember, one shot is powerful, but restraint is strength." Emily internalized every word, feeling the balance of power and responsibility settle within her. The event marked a turning point. Emily had moved from preparation to execution, from theory to practice, and from potential to tangible impact. Kane knew that this mission would define her path as a guardian in the shadows. Every calculation, every exercise, and every lesson had culminated in this moment, demonstrating not only her technical skill, but her moral judgment under extreme pressure. Emily, once a student, had become a practitioner of precision, courage, and ethical responsibility. She had proven herself capable of operating at the highest level of skill and discretion. In the days following the operation, investigators pieced together fragments of information, speculating about a mysterious savior. The public remained unaware of the true hero, and the target's network had been effectively disrupted. Emily observed the aftermath from a distance, reflecting on the responsibility she now carried. Kane emphasized that her work would continue indefinitely, that threats would arise again, and that she must remain vigilant. The city slept safely, oblivious to the invisible hand that acted decisively to prevent catastrophe. The mission also strengthened the bond between Emily and Kane. He praised her not for the act itself, but for her judgment, restraint, and execution. She had proven that skill without ethics was incomplete, and that patience and observation were as important as precision and speed. Kane recognized that Emily had reached a new level of mastery. She could operate independently, make critical decisions under pressure, and uphold the moral framework he had instilled. Emily felt the weight of her success, but also the humbling responsibility it carried. As night fell once more, Emily returned to her secluded vantage point, rifle secured, senses alert. She understood fully that the world was unaware of her existence, yet she had influenced its course in profound ways. The shot had changed everything, the immediate threat neutralized, countless lives protected, and Emily herself transformed from a trainee to a decisive force. Kane watched silently, knowing that the journey was far from over, but confident that Emily had proven her readiness. She had become the unseen guardian the nation needed, capable of confronting darkness without recognition or reward. By the end of Part 6, Emily Parker had taken the first of many steps into a world defined by shadows, precision, and moral responsibility. The nation continued unaware, the threats persisted, but she had established herself as a silent protector whose skill, restraint, and judgment would shape outcomes in ways the public could never imagine. She was no longer simply a student of Kane's teachings. She was a practitioner, a force in the shadows, and a figure whose presence would be felt even if it remained invisible. The perfect shot had not only neutralized a threat, but had also defined the beginning of her legacy. The world began to stir with questions. The mysterious incidents Emily had helped thwart did not go unnoticed for long. News outlets speculated about unknown heroes, anonymous interventions, and unexplained successes in preventing attacks. Social media buzzed with theories, conspiracy threads grew, and investigative journalists sensed a story hidden in the shadows. Yet no one could trace the source. To the public, the protector remained invisible, a ghost whose skill and presence could only be guessed at. Emily watched it all from a distance, her existence still concealed, but knowing the time might come when anonymity would no longer be possible. Kane, ever cautious, reminded her that exposure carried risks. "Curiosity is dangerous," he warned. "Once they begin looking for you, the threat shifts. You are no longer just protecting others. You may become a target yourself." Emily understood the stakes. Her skills had protected lives, but the more successful she became, the more attention she attracted, even if indirect. The balance between influence and invisibility was delicate. She had to remain a ghost while continuing to act with precision and moral clarity. Government agencies became aware of the disruptions to criminal networks and unexplained interventions. Analysts compiled data, noticing patterns too consistent to be coincidence. Unidentified operatives seemed to move across cities, neutralizing threats, gathering intelligence, and disappearing without a trace. Kane guided Emily through this phase, emphasizing that remaining undetected was as critical as the interventions themselves. Emily observed quietly, noting the public response, the investigations, and the careful speculation in intelligence circles. She realized that her actions, once entirely private, were beginning to ripple through larger systems she had never directly engaged with. Emily's identity began to emerge indirectly. Investigators traced unusual patterns of movement, surveillance footage, and eyewitness accounts, gradually narrowing the window of possibilities. Kane, anticipating this, coached Emily on countermeasures, timing movements, altering routines, and remaining anonymous while still achieving results. Emily learned to think not just about the immediate mission, but about the broader consequences of detection. Each success increased scrutiny, and she had to adapt, moving with even greater subtlety, ensuring that her interventions remained effective yet invisible. The first significant leak came when an investigative journalist captured grainy footage of a shadowy figure at a site of intervention. The image was unclear, but enough to spark speculation about the identity of the mysterious operative. Emily watched the news carefully, noting public reactions and government responses. Kane used this as a teaching moment. Even small exposures can create ripples. Your work is only as safe as your discretion. Emily internalized the lesson, refining her movements and strategies. The risk of discovery was real, yet her sense of responsibility remained unwavering. Pressure increased when political analysts began discussing the potential existence of a highly trained, independent operative capable of influencing national events. Reports speculated on connections to military legends, intelligence agencies, and clandestine operations. Names circulated, including Kane's, though only vaguely. Emily remained patient, observing the patterns, understanding the narratives forming around her unseen presence. Kane reminded her that perception could be manipulated, and that controlling information without exposure was another form of mastery. Emily realized that her skills were no longer only tactical, they were strategic, requiring foresight, subtlety, and awareness of the societal lens through which her actions were interpreted. The investigation began to close in on Emily indirectly. Footprints, digital anomalies, and eyewitness accounts created a shadowy profile of a highly skilled operative. Kane decided it was time for Emily to learn a critical lesson in managing identity and narrative. "You cannot hide forever," he said one evening, their figures silhouetted against the fading sunset. "The truth will eventually surface, but you control the story. You decide what the world sees and what it does not." Emily felt the weight of responsibility, not just in protecting lives, but in shaping the perception of her existence, balancing effectiveness with the safety of secrecy. Emily's first confrontation with recognition came when federal analysts began connecting the mysterious interventions to the retired sniper legend. Kane, the name that had once been whispered with awe and fear, resurfaced in classified channels. The public knew little, but the government analysts began asking questions. Kane used this as an opportunity to teach Emily about managing legacy. "Your mentor's past is part of your cover," he explained. "If they see you as an extension of him, they may underestimate your independence. Use it wisely." Emily absorbed the lesson, understanding that perception could be an asset if leveraged carefully. Despite the growing scrutiny, Emily continued her interventions with precision and ethical clarity. She became a ghost in the system, appearing only when necessary, never lingering, and always prioritizing civilian safety. Kane guided her in maintaining the balance between effectiveness and anonymity, ensuring that each mission minimized risk while maximizing impact. Emily learned to anticipate investigative interest, carefully covering traces and manipulating patterns to protect both herself and her operational freedom. The stakes had evolved. It was no longer just about action, but about long-term strategy and survival in a world that was beginning to notice. The culmination of this phase occurred when investigative journalists, tracking patterns across multiple cities, pieced together enough to suggest a single operative might be behind the interventions. Articles speculated about a young protege trained by a legendary sniper, blending skill, discretion, and moral judgment. Emily monitored the speculation with quiet pride and vigilance. The recognition was indirect but significant. Kane reminded her of the lesson. "You do not seek fame, but influence. Let them think what they will. Your actions speak louder than their assumptions." Emily nodded, understanding that the perception of truth could become a tool in protecting herself and others. By the end of Part 7, Emily Parker's identity was no longer completely hidden. The public still did not know her, but analysts, journalists, and government agencies were beginning to trace her influence, connecting her skill and presence to the legendary figure of Kane. Emily had passed the ultimate test of secrecy and efficacy, remaining undetected while leaving an undeniable impact. She understood that exposure, while dangerous, could be managed with intelligence, discretion, and strategy. Emily had become more than a student or a guardian. She was a symbol of unseen precision, a figure whose skill and moral judgment were beginning to shape the perception of safety and security at a national scale. Emily reflected on the months of training, the first missions, and the growing awareness of her presence. She had evolved from a quiet, disciplined teenager into an operative capable of influencing outcomes at the highest level, blending skill with ethical responsibility. Kane watched from the shadows, proud of her growth, yet aware that the next phase would challenge her in ways she could not yet imagine. The truth was beginning to surface, and Emily would have to navigate it carefully. Her journey as a silent guardian was now intertwined with the world's perception, and the lessons she had learned about patience, observation, and restraint would be tested as never before. In the quiet of their training grounds, Emily realized that the invisible hand she had exercised over months was now recognized indirectly, and that every move forward required careful planning, foresight, and moral clarity. The world had begun to notice, but she remained committed to her role as a protector, understanding that the balance between secrecy and influence was delicate. She had become a figure of skill, precision, and restraint capable not only of acting decisively, but also of shaping the narrative surrounding her actions. The truth was emerging, and with it, a new chapter in her legacy was beginning. The city lay in quiet beneath the night sky, unaware of the invisible forces that had protected it for months. Emily Parker stood on a rooftop, surveying the streets below with calm, deliberate focus. She had passed every test, faced the unknown, and acted with precision when it mattered most. The missions had grown in complexity, the stakes higher than she had ever imagined, yet she had met them all. No one knew her name, yet the impact of her actions resonated across the nation. She was no longer merely a student. She was a guardian, a shadow whose presence ensured safety in ways the world could never fully see. Kane stood beside her, silent and vigilant, watching as Emily scanned the streets. His once legendary presence had merged seamlessly with her mentor and protégé, now working in perfect coordination. He had trained her, guided her, and tested her in every way imaginable. But Emily had surpassed even his expectations. She had learned to move unseen, to anticipate danger, and to act decisively while maintaining the moral clarity that Kane had always insisted upon. Tonight, however, the lessons were hers to wield independently. Emily reflected on her journey, the months of grueling training, the first missions in secluded areas, the high-stakes interventions that had saved lives, and the growing recognition that had begun to trace her influence. She understood fully that power came with responsibility, and that true mastery required more than skill. It required patience, judgment, and restraint. Every choice she had made, every action taken in the shadows, had prepared her for this moment, the realization that her role as a silent guardian was permanent, essential, and profoundly consequential. The quiet was shattered by the faint buzz of communication from Kane's earpiece. "New activity," he said softly, eyes scanning the horizon. Emily acknowledged with a nod, her instincts immediately alert. Months of training had honed her senses to detect threats before they became imminent. She observed subtle movements, a shadow shifting behind a building, the glint of metal reflecting distant lights, the faint murmur of voices carried on the wind. She recognized the pattern instantly, an organized group testing defenses, probing for weaknesses, unaware that the nation's most capable unseen protector was already observing them. Emily moved with precision, blending into the rooftop shadows. She adjusted her scope, calculating angles and distances, preparing for rapid decisions if necessary. Kane's guidance was minimal, just subtle confirmations, but her confidence and skill now allowed her to act decisively on her own. She understood that the true measure of a guardian was not the missions completed, but the wisdom to know when to act and when to remain invisible. Tonight, the balance of responsibility rested solely on her shoulders. As the threat drew closer to a critical infrastructure site, Emily prepared for intervention. She observed patterns, predicted movements, and identified the optimal point of action. Civilians were nearby, and safety remained her highest priority. She drew on everything she had learned: breath control, patience, observation, precision, and ethical judgment. One misstep could endanger lives, but Emily's mind was calm, her instincts sharp, and her resolve unwavering. She was a force tempered by experience, guided by morality, and ready to act with unerring accuracy. Then the moment arrived. A single opportunity presented itself, a critical window where decisive action could neutralize the threat without harm to civilians. Emily took a deep breath, aligned her shot, and acted. The intervention was flawless. The threat was incapacitated, the site protected, and the surrounding area remained unharmed. No one noticed her presence, yet the impact was immediate and absolute. Kane allowed himself a rare smile of approval. Emily had executed with mastery, combining skill, judgment, and moral clarity in a single decisive action. The mission complete, Emily retreated from the rooftop, moving through the city streets with practiced silence. She had become a ghost in the urban landscape, invisible yet profoundly influential. The city slept safely, oblivious to the operative who had ensured its security, but Emily felt a deep satisfaction. Her journey from a disciplined teenager under Kane's tutelage to a fully independent guardian had reached a culmination. Yet she understood that vigilance was ongoing. The world would always harbor threats, and her presence would always be needed in the shadows. Kane finally spoke, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of experience. "You have become everything I hoped for and more. The nation is safer because of you. But remember, the work never ends. Every mission, every observation, every choice carries consequence. You are the unseen force. That is your power, and that is your responsibility." Emily absorbed his words, feeling the resonance of a lifetime of training distilled into a single moment of recognition. She was no longer a student. She was the embodiment of the principles Kane had taught her. In the days that followed, Emily's influence became more evident, not through direct acknowledgement, but through the ripple effects of her actions. Threats were neutralized before they could escalate, criminal networks disrupted, and public confidence and security unknowingly reinforced. Analysts speculated, investigators pursued threads, and journalists reported on unexplained successes. Yet Emily remained unseen, her identity a secret, her presence hidden. Kane's lessons in discretion and strategy had ensured that her impact was maximal, while her exposure remained minimal. She had learned that true legacy is measured not by recognition, but by effectiveness and ethical clarity. Emily reflected on the personal transformation she had undergone. She had evolved from a quiet, intelligent teenager into a force capable of shaping outcomes at the highest level. Every lesson, every mission, every challenge had contributed to this metamorphosis. She had mastered patience, observation, precision, and moral judgment. She had confronted danger without hesitation, acted decisively, and maintained her humanity. Kane's guidance had been instrumental, but the culmination of skill, courage, and ethical clarity belonged to her alone. She had become a legend in her own right, a silent guardian operating in the shadows. The city, the nation, and even the world would continue unaware of Emily Parker's role. Yet the legacy she had built was undeniable. She had learned to balance skill with ethics, action with restraint, and anonymity with influence. Her presence ensured safety, her interventions shaped outcomes, and her judgment guided every action. Kane, proud and vigilant, watched as his protégé stepped fully into the role he had prepared her for. Together, they embodied the ultimate convergence of experience, skill, and moral responsibility. As night fell once more, Emily returned to her vantage point, overlooking the city she protected. She understood that her journey was ongoing. The threats would continue, the challenges would grow, and the need for vigilance would never end. Yet she was ready. Her training, her experience, and her ethical grounding had prepared her to face whatever the future held. She was no longer simply a guardian in the shadows. She was a symbol of unseen precision, moral clarity, and unwavering courage. In that moment, Emily realized the truth of Kane's teachings. The greatest legacy is not fame or recognition, but the quiet, profound impact of protecting others when no one is watching. She had become the invisible force ensuring safety and justice, the embodiment of patience, observation, and moral responsibility. And as the city slept peacefully below, Emily Parker accepted her place as the guardian whose legacy would continue silently, shaping the world without ever being seen.